Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me again.
Good to have you. Today, we're just going to do a quick overview, some commentary on what we saw in the third quarter for the four major real estate segments: multifamily, office, industrial, retail. We did some other videos just kind of describing those in detail, but want to do some get some commentary here. Starting off with multifamily, that we're kind of been seeing it returning to pre-COVID conditions.
hmm
Uh, we did see vacancy rate reach a record high level, rising to 7%. That's mostly due to a construction boom. But we're also seeing rents still advancing, and we've seen particularly strong demand in those major urban hubs like New York, Washington, D.C., Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, where there's still a lot of robust demand for apartments. Some of your thoughts just on the multifamily sector that we've seen for the year in Q3.
I think clearly, at some point you had to see a little bit of a slowdown. Just because you have a slowdown doesn't mean you have a regression in rental rates. I think it's important to note that they're still pretty high compared to what they were years ago. And even though the average, I think, over the nationally, dropped from 1.2% rental rate growth to 0.8%, it's still a pretty large jump. In year over year rents on average. In terms for vacancy, I think you're right. There's a lot of new construction that was just being thrown up, and having to fill that space and have people realize what's there and what's available. And I think it probably gets filled up pretty quickly, especially when you have lack of single family properties, or I guess inventory in the single family property side to support the growth and need for people and wanting to move out and move to different places. And multifamily supports that.
Yeah, and I think for me, some of the things that kind of jump out is we've still got a shortage of housing.
Yeah.
And we also have a housing affordability issues with where interest rates and mortgage rates have gone. So particularly some urban areas where housing has just become super expensive, it's really going to, continue to drive rentals and drive people to having to find apartments. And I think that kind of dovetails with what we saw in the quarter in terms of the major urban hubs having a lot of robust demand. For a lot of people, buying a house right now with where rates and prices are is just not a great option.
Well, I think that's a valid point. Rental rates right now are cheaper than what you could get in an actual mortgage rate. Plus, your down payment makes it difficult for people just starting out to go through and put that chunk of change down on a property to buy. They could just go rent, and it's a cheaper cost, monthly cost for them to rent than it is for them to buy.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, turning now to Office, that was really what was garnering a lot of the headlines, particularly where we did see during the quarter kind of continuing problems for some of the tech hubs like San Francisco, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, Chicago, in terms of them having office vacancies, pretty high rates. I think we're also seeing delivery of office spaces continuing, so kind of some demand problems in some areas, particularly those tech hubs, as well as more supply coming online. And that's really has created an issue, particularly in a few markets, San Francisco most notable among them, for having fairly high vacancy rates. And that's been kind of driving a lot of the news coverage for real estate. What are your thoughts on office?
I look. I mean, the market that you're discussing that's getting hit the hardest is really tech office space. And I think everybody fails to recognize that there's more than tech that occupies office space throughout the country. There's millions of small businesses that need and still continue to want office space. Again, it's not a dying breed or a dying asset. It's just changing. And if we're gonna, I think if we're gonna have the headlines be ruled by offices dying, at least note that it's dying in San Francisco because it's all related to tech.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, and I think during the period it was a record high of 13.3% vacancy in office as a class. But I really think kind of the headline here is the headlines are wrong. I mean, the headline's kind of been commercial real estate's in an awful place, and then somebody does a story about San Francisco, and I think it's a fair story that downtown San Francisco is in an awful place.
Yeah.
But that's one market. Office is just one class. So I think that the big thing I take out of office is that people are taking kind of a very entertaining kind of the sky is falling news story and getting kind of a misunderstanding of commercial real estate, which is very diverse, multiple segments, multiple areas. So I wouldn't argue for 1 second that San Francisco doesn't have some problems and some of these tech hubs don't have some issues. At the same time, there's markets like we've got office in Savannah, we've got office in a Miami submarket that's doing very well.
Yeah.
Um, and there's different types of office. So I think that's for me kind of the headline of office. So turning to industrial, which is definitely been the more positive, more optimistic story. Q3, we're continuing to see it just surge. Lowest vacancy rates at 5.1% just after the retail sector. Rent price increases, although decelerating, they're currently still at 7.5% increase year over year. That's from a really stunning 11.4% increase the previous year. Um, your thoughts on the industrial space, which just remains really strong.
Industrial's a good asset class for, for people who really just don't want to do a whole lot. You know, you generally unload all your expenses, all your costs onto the tenants, which, is understandable why you see large jumps. But truth is there just wasn't enough industrial out there, and there's new industrial that's come online. And talking about Class A industrial is gonna garner better rates than what it was before. But you're also seeing industrial grow primarily because there's industry that's coming back to the United States. There's other retail industries that need places to put product that they didn't really need before. And market by market, it changes dramatically. Savannah is one
Yeah.
of those has a ton of new industrial that's online. They still have a rather low vacancy rate, but it's slowed down dramatically because they just have too much. So I think market by market you're going to see probably large scale differences that that make up industrial compared to office compared to multifamily that make industrial a really interesting and viable investment long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the bad news on industrial is a lot of people understand how strong it is and the benefits, and it's reflected in a lot of the pricing. So you definitely have to do your work to find bargains or value in it. The good news is that strength isn't just one area, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you mentioned reshoring. There's definitely strengths behind that.
Yeah.
You're seeing more manufacturing. There's the e-commerce. You're definitely seeing more need for warehouse space and delivery, including now we're seeing more at point of delivery where you need those spaces and whatnot. There's data centers. The cell phone towers. A lot of these things where you think about the future. Well, even a virtual future has a physical footprint, and
Well, let's I mean
industrials. Yeah.
let's take it
Mhm.
even one step further. Most people, they think of dirty, ugly industrial, and that's kind of true. I mean, in the grand scheme, if you're looking at it, people are still driving cars every day. You still need mechanics, and mechanics aren't going in retail space for the most part. They don't. That's not the dollars they spend. They go in these places where they can beat them up because that's what industrial is meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah, and so let's turn now to the space that actually had the lowest vacancy rate, with industrial being only second to it, and that was retail, where we're continuing to see a robust demand for retail and kind of a space that a lot of people had dismissed for dead a few years back with e-commerce. We're seeing it doing, that segment doing very well. It's being led by neighborhood centers and power centers in terms of where we're seeing the biggest rent hikes. But we've also seen general retail um, rebound with some modest rent growth. And we're seeing a lot of momentum in the Sun Belt when it comes to retail. I think Phoenix, Jacksonville, Tampa, Las Vegas, Salt Lake. they're all experiencing a real surge in demand, with rent growth surpassing 8% in those Sun Belt cities. Some of your just highlights or the key thoughts on retail, what we saw in Q3 and what we are seeing.
I think it's interesting. Again, retail's not dead; it just changes. But I think really, like you discussed, is changes in how big box operates. I think there's a transition to the smaller retail, smaller neighborhood centers, um, because larger retail asset operators don't want to deal with your big box stores that, during a COVID can tell them, sorry, we're just not going to pay you for 6, 8, 12 months. We'll catch up later if you're still here. And if you're not here, we'll just get out of our lease. And then so it's, there's no real general recourse to a, operator at that point, where small mom and pop, neighborhood places, that's their livelihood. They're there every day. They're there pushing their product out the doors, and it makes sense. And they're getting better pricing, and they're servicing their clients locally. They don't have to go to different, they don't have to drive. They can walk to a store, walk to a convenience store. You know,
Yeah, I think to me that is also kind of the headline here is kind of the point of service that we've seen a big drive to be closer to people,
yeah,
for people to have more convenience, to be able to, order something online, and even if it's dropped in their house, if it's a restaurant, it has to be sent from a restaurant close to the house to drop to the house, or maybe it isn't dropped to the house. Maybe they buy it, it's shipped to a local store, and they can just pick it up. But convenience is a big thing. I think the move to the suburbs, right, with the millennials starting to move to that kind of family formation, the move away from urban cores into the suburbs is driving this. And then, of course, we've always kind of liked the Sun Belt. We continue to see migration to those areas, and retail is just a segment that benefits from having more people coming into areas that are business friendly, have positive demographics. So, to me, there's a few headlines here on retail. But yeah, the traditional shopping mall may be going the way of the dinosaurs, but retail is doing just fine. And it's, got a lot of places of strength to pick among.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, appreciate the insights, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Steve.